Hello everyone, this is Graeme Anderson from Four Corners of the Board. Now before I start this review, I want to say that the humor in this game could be considered objectionable by some, so I would consider this game a 14+. So I just wanted to give you a warning before starting the review. Now with all that said, today I'm going to be reviewing Orphans and Ashes, and to give us its full title, it's Orphans and Ashes, the game of strategic orphan burning. Yeah. So this is a game that's based on the Looking for Group webcomic, which I will tell you up front I have not read, and I had not heard of before I even played this game. Now this back of the box doesn't say much about the gameplay, but it seemed to be a lightly strategic, humorous two-player game with some dexterity elements. So without knowing the theme, how well does this game itself stand up? Well, let's get to the table, see how it's played, then we'll come back for my final thoughts on Orphans and Ashes. So here are the components for Orphans and Ashes. You've got the two main characters, Richard and Cale. Both have two minis, and one is going to be used for the game, and the other one's going to be used as a score marker. You also have a bunch of orphan pawns, fire tokens, and red fire tokens called Fouche tokens, and only Richard can use these red fire pawns. There are also a set of room cards, both named and generic, and I'll get into these more when we talk about the setting up the board and moving around the board. There are also a bunch of markers to designate dead ends and exits. Now this is a two-player only game, where one person takes the role of Cal, the valiant hero who gains victory points by rescuing orphans, and the other player is Richard, who will try and kill the orphans when no one is looking at you to gain victory points. The fire can also gain victory points for each orphan that dies in a fire. As the players, you want to make sure that the fire does not gain the most victory points. If the fire does have the most victory points, then nobody wins the game. The game setup is fairly straightforward. Each player chooses who they want to play and will decide who goes first. Then you take 7 named and 7 generic tiles and shuffle them all together to make one room stack. The player who's going to go second will then draw 4 tiles and place them next to the 4 doors on the starting tile. Now, when drawing and placing a room tile, you must populate it right away. If the room is named, it will also show you how many orphans and fires must be placed. If it is just a generic room, you'll always spawn 1 orphan and 1 fire. Whoever draws the tiles gets to decide where the orphan and fire tokens go. Cale will probably want the orphans close to the door, while Richard will want them far away. Now you're ready to play, and there are 2 phases to each player's turn. You'll take 3 actions, and then the fire will spread. The basic action that both players can do are move, guide, put out fire, stop, drop, and roll, or you can use your character's special ability. To move, you'll roll a die, and that's how far you can move. All movement in the game is orthogonal, never diagonal. You can interrupt your movement to perform another one of your 2 actions, then continue your movement. You automatically open any doors, and then you see if you found an exit or another room. When you reach a door, you're going to roll a die, and on a 1 to 4 you find a room, and on a 5 or 6 the door is an exit. If it's a room, you're going to pull a room tile and place it. If it cuts off any other doors in other rooms, you'll mark them as impassable. If you find an exit, mark it as such. Now no room can block an already placed exit. Any other doors that would open up to the same area as a previously discovered exit will also be marked as an exit. If you are Cale and you move to an exit door, all the orphans you are carrying that are not on fire will be saved and you will score 1 point for each. The orphans are removed from the Cale pawn and put back into the general supply. If you want to use the guide action, you'll roll a die and move an orphan that many spaces. The orphans must start and end within your line of sight. You can also use the guide action to move the other player's pawn in line of sight 1 space. Now line of sight in this game is very straightforward. If you can draw a line from one square to another square without going through a wall or an obvious furniture such as a library stack, you have line of sight. You can also put out fires in the room. Roll a die, and depending on the roll, you can put out that many fires, either on orphans or just the fires in the room. If you are on fire, you can use the stop, drop, and roll action. This action will put out 1 fire from your pawn. Now these are the basic actions that either player can do. Then there are character-specific actions. Cale can use the With Me special action. All orphans not on fire in a room with Cal will move towards Cal's space. If they are forced to go through fire, they will make a fire roll, and I'll talk a bit more about the fire rolls during the fire phase. Cale can have as many orphans as he can carry, and this does add a bit of dexterity to the game. His pawn must physically carry the orphans. If any orphans fall off Cale, they immediately die and the fire scores a point for them. Cale can also use his "You are under my protection" action, which allows Cale to put out all fires and orphans in the same room. Richard's special actions are whoosh and hey, that was my kill. If Cal does not have line of sight to Richard, Richard can roll a die and add a certain amount of whoosh tokens to orphans in line of sight. 2 whoosh tokens on an orphan allows Richard to collect the souls of the orphan and score a victory point. His "Hey, that was my kill" action allows you to replace yellow tokens with one of his red tokens on an orphan within line of sight, as long as Cal does not have line of sight on Richard. And that's it for the actions you can take. Once a player has taken their 3 action, the fire spreads, which is the second phase of a player's turn. The active player will roll a die to determine how many fire spread. For each fire that spread, add 1 new fire token to a space in a room that already has at least 1 fire token. Now fires always spread in the following way. It needs to be next to a current fire. If it can go to an orphan already on fire, it must. If it can't reach an orphan, it must spread to as close as possible to an orphan. And fire only spreads once per room per fire phase. If the fire reaches any pawn, player or orphan, place a yellow fire token on that pawn. Now orphans have 2 hit points, Cal has 5 and Richard has 4. If a player or orphan has to cross fire, you make a fire roll. On a 1, they catch fire. On anything else, they're fine. If a pawn's hit points equals the number of fire tokens on them, then they are removed from the board. If it was an orphan, the fire scores a point. If it was one of the players, then the other player will automatically win. The game will end when one of the characters dies and the other player instantly wins, or the game will end when all the rooms have been searched and all the orphans have been dealt with. The player with the most victory points is the winner, unless, of course, the fire has the most victory points. In that case, nobody wins. Anyway, that's how you play. Now let's get back to see what I thought about Orphans and Ashes. So, what did I think of this game? Well, I'm going to tell you right up front, I didn't like this game. Now, the components seem to be hit or miss. The minis are good quality, both the figures and the fire tokens, but the cardboard tiles are just not. They're very thin and flimsy. The minis don't fit on the scoring track well, but the minis did hold up well through repeated plays. I had no issue with the fire tokens or the orphan tokens. I was actually kind of worried that the orphan hands were going to break by taking them on and off Cal all the time. Now the theme for the game, although I hate to say it, actually works well within the confines of the game. The skills and what you're doing make sense within the game. But luckily the theme itself is not overly pervasive in the gameplay, which is a good thing. When an orphan dies, it's just removed from the game. So if you remove the theme from the game, how well do the mechanisms hold up? Well, again, not well, I'm afraid. It all comes down to dice rolls. If you roll better than your opponent and get lucky, you're going to win. There are many instances in the game where one player, usually the one playing Cal, would roll really well, reveal a room with orphans in it, use his special ability to collect the orphans, and get to an exit and score points, all in one turn. Since the game was almost all luck, you would hope that it would all kind of even out. Both sides should win an equal number of times. But with my, albeit limited number of plays, which was 7 in total, I found that the game does seem to have some balance issues. In all the games I played, Cal always seemed to win. Getting points as Richard just seems to be harder to do. Now, maybe I haven't played it enough, but I felt I kind of gave the game the benefit of the doubt. But honestly, the last few games were just not fun and just were flat out boring, because we tried to make sure that during the game that we used all the abilities of both characters to see how things worked. It just seemed that Richard had a harder time to score points. Now, maybe that's tied to the comic, since Richard does seem to be an evilish character, and maybe it's supposed to be harder for the evil character to win. But to be honest, after the first couple game or two, while we were actually trying to inject some fun into the game by kind of character and role playing the different people we were playing, after a while we just kind of reverted and just ignored the theme and just played the game. And it just wasn't fun for us. Now, I was hoping that the dexterity element of the game, especially the Cal's character, would be interesting, but no one seemed to ever have any issues. There always seemed to be an exit relatively close to Cal, and you can easily carry 4 to 6 orphans on Cal without issues. I like the idea, but it never paid off in the game. So I'm going to say that if you enjoyed the web series and you wanted to support them through this game, I could see purchasing it. But for all others, this is definitely one I would skip. I would not recommend this game. And with that, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.